Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's holiday webcast. My name is Alex Parkinson. I'm the principal of Parkey Communications and also the co-leader of the Communications Institute here at the conference board. Thank you all for joining us on what is probably a busy week for everyone, as everyone there is trying to get things wrapped up before the holidays. Today's webcast is a deep dive into social media and the Fortune 500. We're very lucky to be joined by someone who's been overseeing an important research study, a longitudinal research study for the past 10 years or so into the topic, and as well a representative of the Fortune 500 from Texas Instruments, both of whom I will introduce in just a moment. However, we have the fun of a little housekeeping before we get there. First of all, you can earn CPE credits for this webcast. All you need to do is stay on for the whole duration of the webcast and then click the three pop-ups that you'll see appear on your screen. Secondly, the slides for today's webcast are available to download. You can see a little download pod on the bottom left of your screen. Just click that and you'll be able to download those slides. There will be a recording of the webcast that will be available within about 24 to 48 hours after the webcast. So if you have any colleagues who you think might be interested or want to share this with them, please feel free to do so. You'll receive a link in the follow-up email afterwards. Finally, there's an evaluation at the end of the webcast. Please just take a couple of minutes there to give us your feedback about it. It helps us to inform our future programs as well, so we'd appreciate it if you take a moment to do that. So that is all of the housekeeping out of the way. I would now like to introduce my guests who are joining me today. First of all, Rachel Hawkins is the Worldwide Digital and Social Corporate Communications Manager at Texas Instruments. She's going to be giving us the perspective of the Fortune 500. Rachel, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Alex.
Great. And then on the other end, from Massachusetts, hope it's not too cold for you up there, Nora Gannon-Barnes, who is the Chancellor and Professor of Marketing and the Director of the Center for Marketing Research at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth, and the leader of the study. Nora, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
Wonderful. So we're actually going to get started with you, Nora, today. We're going to take a little time to hear some of the key findings from your research, which I understand is just about available, if it's not already available, on the Center for Marketing Research's website. So, Nora, why don't you take us away and give us a little overview of what you found?
I'd love to. We're really excited. We do this research every year. And there's always something really fun in it. And it's so great to have someone from the Fortune 500 with us today to comment on it. I don't often get to talk about this research with an actual practitioner who's out in the field. So this is wonderful. I'm happy to have Rachel with us. This first slide is really kind of a fun one because down the right are all the different social media tools and platforms that we looked at this year. And the left, you'll see the top Fortune 500 companies. So when we're talking about this research, we're talking about Walmart, Exxon, Amazon, certainly Texas Instruments, and so many of the wealthiest companies in the world. So it's kind of fun. The methodology is something nobody ever likes to talk about, but I think it's really important up front to be clear on what we did and how we did it. So we were looking for public-facing presence. So this is a corporate blog or Facebook or Twitter that was not private, it was not internal, it was a public-facing tool or platform, and with a post in the last 30 days, because there are so many inactive accounts that we certainly didn't want to be counting those. So we looked for some activity. There was one or two exceptions to this where a company regularly posted every 45 days or did something a little bit odd but was active. So we were very cognizant of what we looked at. So it was public facing and it was active. Those were the two things we were looking for. We also got tripped up a little bit because not all companies put their links to their social media on their websites. So we did go to the websites first and we mocked everything that they had, but then we actually exited and used search engines. So for example, if you're looking for the Exxon blog, the only way you can find the Exxon blog is if you Google Exxon and blog, you won't find it from their corporate homepage. So we had to do a lot of legwork to make sure that we knew for sure if someone had these platforms or these tools. And we've done this research every year since 2008, which I'm really proud of. And the best part of that is we have great visuals of the trends. And that's something that, is really helpful for companies who want to emulate these companies, or for any business that just wants to know what the trends are. So that's what we did. This is our big summary, and why it might look a little crazy when you first look at it. It's the last 3 years, and it's the platforms that we've looked at consistently. And if you want to just make it real simple for yourself, you can look at the blue bars. The blue bars are the latest data. That's 2019. And as you can see from the blue bars, we're really up there. And I know Rachel and I and Alex will talk about saturation, but we're really at the point where we have over 90% of our companies using a lot of these platforms already. So you can see the first set of bars is for Twitter, and we're at 94% in Twitter. I'm going to put my glasses on for this, make sure I get my numbers right. 96% on Twitter. On Facebook, we're at 95%. On YouTube, we're at 90%. Blogs are the highest they've ever been at 54%. Instagram, you'll notice, goes up about 10% a year. So you'll see from the last 3 years, the jumps from 53, 63, 73. So that's really one to watch. And LinkedIn has just been their prime source of communication for quite a long time now. We asked the Fortune 500, in addition to the tools and platforms that we proposed, what else they were using. And LinkedIn has been a favorite. We didn't early on consider it social media, but they're doing a lot of interacting, B2B interacting, consumer interacting, recruiting. And so it's just something that they use a lot, and we didn't want to not include it in the study. So this is just the big overview, and what you can see from here for sure is that we've got a lot of use of these platforms. So the high saturation is one thing that we really do want to talk about today. You got LinkedIn at 99%, Twitter at 96%, Facebook at 95%, YouTube at 90%. So the question is, where do we go from here? What happens when we have everyone using these platforms all the time? And how does that impact not only noise, but engagement, effectiveness, and those are things hopefully Rachel can help me with a little bit later. Rank is important. I know that Texas Instruments is in the top 200, and so this is particularly relevant. But we found that the Fortune 500 companies that are in the top 200 consistently, and this is since we've started doing this study in 2008, every single year they use more social media than the bottom 200 in the Fortune 500. So I don't know if this is a chicken and egg thing, if the more successful companies have more money to spend on social media, can hire social media people, have social media departments, or if using social media catapults one into the top 200. I don't know if it's a chicken or an egg thing, but there's no doubt every single year that the companies that are the most successful by wealth, by the measure of wealth, are using more social media than are companies with less wealth. So it's just an interesting finding, and maybe somebody in the audience has some explanation for me on that one. This study has evolved over time, and we've added things. So at the very beginning, we studied blogs. Obviously, one of the reasons for that was that blogs were one of the most predominant of our social media very early on, and I was particularly interested in blogs. In 2006, I did the first study on business bloggers, and it was very successful, and so we thought we'd start to follow up with that among the Fortune 500. So the usage in 2008 for blogs was 16%, and now 54% are using blogs. This is a real interesting one because initially in 2008, blogs were very chatty, very conversational, very helpful, very advisory. So you had, for example, you might have a pet food company giving advice about shots for your animals, or where to take them if they were distressed, or how to handle an emergency. And now the blogs that we're seeing are very much like newsrooms. We're getting a lot of announcements of new products. We're getting some promotion, more so than we've ever seen before. So blogs are changing, and we can talk more about that later. In 2009, we added Twitter, and at that time, about 35% were on Twitter. It's at 96% now. So Twitter is something that the Fortune 500 have gotten very comfortable with. They've increased their usage of every year. We'll see a little bit later that small companies that are in the fast-growing Inc. 500, which is another group we looked at, are not quite as keen on Twitter as the Fortune 500 are. So that's kind of interesting too. Facebook came into our study in 2010. About half of them were using it, and now it's at 95%. By 2012, we had added YouTube, and again, keeping everything that we've kept. So now we've got quite a list. So we had about 2/3 on YouTube. That's at 91%. Instagram, we decided to take a look at in 2013, and 9% were on Instagram, and it's at 73% now. So certainly you can see, if you just look at this chart quickly, that that's certainly been the fastest adoption that we've seen. And LinkedIn started off very high, is even higher. So this is just kind of a look at what's happened at our end. We've tried to evolve, we've tried to add things, and I'd love to hear suggestions about other things that we could add next year. So the blog thing really is interesting to me because comments on blogs is one of the things that's radically changed. 18% of the 2019 Fortune 500 are taking comments. And that's been a continual decline since we started this research in 2008. At that time, 90% took comments, 90% were taking comments. And that's amazing that we can now be down to 18%. So quite a dramatic look. And if you look at it visually, this isn't every year since 2008, but this is the last 5 years. And it actually looks like this. If we just added more bars going all the way back to when we first started these studies in 08, you would just see this exact same trend. So it started at 90% when we started, went down, 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 down. And this is quite an interesting finding because I'm not sure what it means. I do know that it means there's less direct engagement with consumers, that now they're not able to speak directly with the blog people, who's the social media people running the blogs, the corporation that's posting. So it's an interesting fact to look at. So as I look back on this particular study, I think there are some points of interest that'll be a great discussion today, and I know I'd love to hear input on. YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and blogs all have experienced growth. And we are looking in many of these cases at what I would say is saturation at this point in time. And the implications of that, I think, are pretty interesting for where we go from here. Blog posts are less conversational. I'm a huge fan of blogs. I think it's one of the few tools or platforms that's totally owned and operated by its provider. It has no restrictions. It's really just a wonderful way to talk directly to people. And so them becoming less conversational may or may not impact the future of blogging and what it looks like. They continue to remove these comments, and that's not something that I've seen come up in the literature. I don't know that anybody else has documented it. And for those people wondering what happened to other platforms like Google+, Pinterest, Snapchat, Foursquare, a number of other things that have been included from time to time, they drop off when we see no activity. Google+ we followed for a long, long time, and I have to tell you, Google+ suffered from more abandoned accounts than any other platform we've ever looked at. Right now, we had 3 companies that had active Google+ accounts. We had 15 active Pinterest accounts. We had 5 active Snapchat accounts. So these are things that, at least for now, we've put aside, looking at things that may have more usage. So that's where we are right now on those platforms. I wanted to add just a few things that I thought you'd find as interesting as I did because we look at the Inc. 500, which are the fastest growing small businesses, and we can add their information in with these wealthy companies that we've just looked at. And we asked some questions of the Inc. 500 that we didn't ask of the Fortune, and I thought you might like to see the results of those. So in those cases where we can actually compare them, I can tell you this. I can tell you that for years, the Inc. 500 outblogged the Fortune 500. That has just changed. Now the Fortune 500 are more likely to have active blogs than Inc., and this is just recent. I will also tell you that the Inc. outdid everything from the Fortune. They were the most active on all social media, and that's changing too. In 2019, 95% of the Inc. used at least one platform, 99% of Fortune used at least one. So we're seeing what was more predominant in small companies now making its way to the largest companies. Twitter did not increase among the Inc. 500, and it was reported by executives in the Inc. 500 that it was their least effective social media platform. Twitter usage, on the other hand, was up 5% among Fortune 500 companies. So even the way that these successful companies look at the exact same platform is different. It's pretty interesting to watch. And while Instagram usage is 73% among Fortune 500, it's at 52% among the Inc. 500. So they're making very different choices in terms of what platforms they use and how they feel about those platforms. So these are things that are kind of unique to the Inc. 500, which I've separated out. I don't have Fortune 500 information on this, but I thought you might kind of enjoy what the Inc. 500 are thinking. The top concern among executives in the Inc. 500 is ROI. They're concerned about the money that they're putting into social media and whether or not that is worth it. It comes up every year. That has not changed. In the past 5 years, ROI comes out as a major concern every time. About half of the Inc. 500 are now reporting that the value of free social media has leveled off for them. 53% are moving to paid ads, and that's a 14% increase. So we are seeing a movement, at least in the fast-growing small companies, saying that free doesn't get them what it used to, that they're moving to paid. And that's something that certainly is worth talking about. And finally, 34% of the Inc. have no written social media plan. 70% don't have an online crisis plan. This, to me, just as a researcher, seems to scream red flag and problem. So I think it's something that is worth noting and something that's worth taking another look at. I worry about this as there's more and more negative activity online. The last thing in my wrap up is some of my favorite companies that are usually using social media really well, measuring social media effectively. Nike is one of my favorites because it always shows up on the top of both Twitter and Facebook. So they have the most Facebook likes and they have the most Twitter followers. Extremely popular, just do a wonderful job with their social media and with their engagement. The same is true of Starbucks, except they stumbled when they got some bad publicity about some customers being asked to leave. You could see their social media drop off and then pick up again. So I watch Starbucks because the Starbucks users really react on social media to what's going on at Starbucks. So it's an interesting one to watch. They're a very reactive group. Walt Disney World does an incredible job, and now with their new media company is just really, really nailing it on social media. Legos, again, if you want to see some really fun things, any of the Lego social media is fun. And I've added a personal favorite, and it's Casper mattresses, which I've only recently become acquainted with because I did some work on chatbots and the increased use of chatbots among big companies. Casper does it better than anybody. So Casper actually has an insomniac bot. And if you can't sleep between midnight and 5, you can go to the Casper mattress site and the bot will entertain you. The bot tells jokes. The bot will suggest that you order pizza. It makes conversation. It will play games. It has just garnered such a following, such a cult following, as Casper mattresses have as well, but a really fun site. And when you want to talk about engagement, I think just the perfect example, even with a chat bot, of engagement. So that to me was just a really fun one to include. I think our discussion from here, the things I'd love to hear people talk about are the changing tone of engagement with corporate blogs, the need for crisis and management plans for social media, organic versus paid, saturation, maybe studying newer platforms. I mean, does it make any sense to include TikTok in the next study? I would love to hear what anybody has to say about any of these things. To me, they're all just so interesting. And as a researcher, I don't often get to talk to practitioners and hear the other side of what might be going on. So I'm ready.
Well, thank you very much, Nora. I think we'll stick on that slide for the discussion there for the duration until we get to the end. Rachel is sitting patiently waiting to tell us about social media at Texas Instruments. And Rachel, I will get to you in just a moment. I just want to clarify a couple of methodological questions with you, Nora, and also to correct myself because I have to revisit housekeeping. I'm sorry, I can't read my own notes. Questions and comments for the audience are available in the bottom left pod, and I see that Tim Powell has already found it and is active, and fortunately those are a couple of methodological questions as well. So we'll just cover these very quickly, Nora, and then we'll come to you, Rachel. First of all, Nora, so you mentioned this at the beginning. You're only looking at corporate accounts rather than brand social media accounts. Is that right?
Yeah, we had to make a decision early on what we could control, what we could measure. And of course, the proliferation of brands, subsidiaries. It gets very, very messy when you start to break down the Fortune 500 into any pieces. And so we decided early on that we would look at corporate accounts. And once we made that decision in 2008, the only way you can do a longitudinal study is to stick with that. So I think from time to time, we've gone off and we've looked at certain platforms, certain tools, certain brands, like Nike, for example. But this study has always been done looking at corporate accounts.
Do you think you'd find anything particularly different if you went into brand accounts? I had to put you on the spot, and perhaps the answer's no. But I mean, if you have a hypothesis or something about how companies use brand accounts.
Well, yeah, I mean, I suspect that you would find lots of activity and lots of different kinds of activity, and I think it could be really fun. But again, when we say brands, we're talking literally about just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of brands. And so making any kind of comparison, and again, as a researcher, what you're trying to do is come up with trends or comparisons. And so I think for me, I almost have to stick really close to those things that are measurable and those things that have been clearly matched in the past. So I think for me, brands is too big to take on. And I think that for us, we can only look at certain brands at certain times. And I think that's really fun to do. But yeah, I'm not planning any widespread study that includes brands.
Fair enough. Okay. So you mentioned a little bit of activity there, and Tim's questions refer to that. Do you, other than yes or no, the corporate account uses this platform, do you capture any data on how much they use it? For example, number of posts, or you've mentioned activity. So I think I know the answer, but let's hear it from you.
Only number of posts, only in that they post within the last 30 days. We do look at likes and followers on their accounts, but we tried unsuccessfully to interview Fortune 500 companies. We tried several years to get more information. We have much more luck with the Inc. 500 responding to us and giving us extended interviews. So no, I really, other than those measures, I don't have anything else.
Fair enough. And that might actually answer the next question about whether you capture qualitative data or information. For example, why don't they take comments on blogs and things like that? Perhaps not through interviews, but do you try to capture that in any other way?
No, what we do a lot of times is we'll funnel those questions into the Inc. 500 study, because we do have executives that will talk to us, and we do try to float those. This is the first time that the comments have just become such a glaring issue that I think it does mandate some follow-up, and I think we will try to do that. Right now, I don't have that. I'm hoping maybe Rachel will have some insight, or you might have some insight, or one of our audience might have some insight. All I can tell you is that blogs are shutting down in terms of taking comments, and I think that that's a little bit sad for me, because I love what blogs, how blogs came into being and what their original nature was. And I feel like we're losing a bit of that, and I think I'd love to hear some explanation of it.
Great. Okay. Well, Rachel, while we hear the findings here and get a little foundation, something to reflect on, I'm going to turn to you now. I'd like to ask you to give an overview of social media at Texas Instruments and sort of your strategy and how it's used at the company. So, Rachel, please take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex. Well, Texas Instruments is more of a B2B company in terms of our social media communications. But, our goal on social media is to create content for our intended audiences. So we, design engineers is a large audience pool for us, and we want to create and communicate content to them, that may help them in their design engineering needs. Other key audiences for us are current and prospective employees, and then really anybody with an interest in the technology space. Given those variety of audiences, our goal for any and all of our social media content really remains the same, and it's showcasing the breadth and depth of TI's portfolio, across the technology and digital spectrum, and for design engineers in particular, to provide them with those tools and resources that they need to solve various things they're working on. And then for our current and prospective employees, it's we use social media as an opportunity to just further the TI brand and highlight TI's truly global employee workforce, and showcase and demonstrate how TI is a great place to work. I know I did say earlier, TI is a B2B company. I think though that our goals as a B2B company for the content we create and how we want to measure the effectiveness of that content is really the same that you would see for a B2C company or any brand social media pages. I know you and Nora were talking about that earlier, and it really boils down to creating that effective content for our intended audiences on the channels and platforms where they are. So that's sort of a TI's approach to social media in a nutshell.
Great, thank you very much, Rachel. I think it's really interesting in the past few years how B2B companies have really started to embrace social media. I did a research study, I think it was 3 years ago, in which I interviewed a lot of representatives and social media managers at companies, and often heard from B2B companies that they didn't really use social media that much, because they're a B2B company. But clearly, there are audiences of all sorts online and using social media now, and your design engineers is a great example. And I think a lot of, well, as we see from the saturation point, that all companies are really starting to embrace the use of social media now. I want to ask you, Rachel, just a couple of questions before we go into a broader discussion about Nora's findings. You mentioned reaching your employee workforce. How important is employee advocacy and use of social media in that process at Texas Instruments?
providing our employees with content that they, whether it's a picture of a coworker that they may recognize, or if it's just, a great breakthrough innovation, that we've come up with here at TI, providing employees with that content that, puts a face to the company or that highlights the great things the company is doing, that the company is doing, and to give employees opportunity to share that content out to their followers. That's been that's something that we value, and content that we aim to create. So I think for a lot of companies, your employees are going to be on social media anyway, and creating or providing them with content to showcase the great things that you're doing and to demonstrate that your company may be a great place to work is something that's proven to be valuable for us.
Great. And then, I think this goes back to audience, but are there certain platforms that are more important to a B2B company like Texas Instruments?
Yes. I think it really goes back to that overarching goal that we have at TI for social media content, and possibly, any company you may ask would have a similar answer of, wanting to create the right content, for our intended audience on whatever channel they may be. So the channels that we prioritize here at TI are the channels where, we know that our audience is. And so I think that's how we determine what we prioritize. After that, I think we then start to focus on, the purpose of each channel and the nuanced differences between the various channels.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so why don't we start with some of these discussion topics here? We'll probably jump around this slide a little bit, forgive me, but I have my questions lined up here, so I'm going to go in that order if that is okay. I want to talk first of all about this saturation point that we seem to have reached, Nora and Rachel. First of all, Nora, when did you start to see that saturation was on the horizon and predict that we might get to this point?
Well, that slide, and we can go back to it if you want to, of the last 3 years, I think that, do you want me to flip back to it?
I've got you here.
Okay, great. I appreciate the help. The colorful one at the beginning, we can see the last 3 years, so you can actually.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah, so you can actually see right there, and I guess I'm not sure. I'm not really sure. I mean, they're big jumps. If you look at the last 3 years, I'm not sure that we could have predicted that we would be here now. Some of the jumps like YouTube are pretty big. Certainly Instagram up 10% is big. So I'm not sure. We see it now, obviously, but I don't know that we could have predicted it.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, and when we're talking about saturation here, I think it's probably important to note that there's only one company in the Fortune 500 that doesn't use social media, right? So although we sort of see high 90s in some, particularly LinkedIn, we know that almost all of them are actually on one platform or another. That's
right.
So
but not all on all platforms.
Right, exactly. But what's the significance of that, of so many companies, in these large companies using social media? What does that mean for the market?
It's interesting. I often go out and speak about social media usage, and one of the things I always say is, so these are tools. I mean, these are tools, and if you had a real toolbox in your house, you wouldn't grab a screwdriver and run around the house looking for something to fix. But I think that companies very often grab tools. We should be on Facebook. We should be on Twitter. Instagram looks like something we should be on. And I think that very often the Fortune 500 have done that. They've thought, in fact, that they should be on these, and they grab them and they use them. But what we're hearing from the Inc. 500 is they're not all effective, that they don't all do the job, that ROI is certainly lacking in some of those cases. So I'm one of those people who thinks that what we're seeing is more a case of a lack of critical decision making. I think personally, and Rachel can help me with this, is that social media use should be reevaluated. There should be a plan at every company, and they should reevaluate the platforms and tools they use. And it may be that they don't need to be on everything all the time. It may be that there are some platforms and tools that work better for them.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about social media plans in a second. I just want to stick with this point that you made there about effectiveness. So you noted that fewer than 30% of companies say Twitter is effective. Is that the Inc. 500 or the Fortune 500 that have said that?
That's the Inc. 500.
Okay. So why are they still using it? And Rachel, maybe
there
this is something.
Yeah, there it is. That's the question, and that's what makes me say what I just said. I'm not sure where the evaluation is.
Right.
I'm not sure where the
Rachel,
are.
Let's ask you, Rachel. Do you think Twitter is an effective platform? And in terms of other platforms as well, where do you think it stands in its effectiveness?
I think you first have to step back and look at the purpose of Twitter. If we, Twitter, it's a news-like platform. The types of content that you'd see on Twitter are more, they're very timely in the moment communications. While all of social media content has a relatively short half-life, Twitter's is generally, it's even shorter than that. So I think it's understanding, if you go back to those two basic tenets of, your intended audience and the information and the content they're expecting from you, and then also combining that with the purpose of the platforms that you're on. If you have an audience that has a need and a desire for timely, relevant information and news-like information, they may likely be on Twitter. And if you have information that is timely and newsworthy, it can be, an effective platform. So I think it's stepping back and looking at those things to determine the effectiveness of a social media platform, and if you have the content that fits the purpose of that platform.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. Okay, why don't we talk a little bit about paid versus organic? And Nora, you'd pointed out something about this in, I think, among the Inc. 500, right, as opposed to the Fortune 500. But can you explain a little bit how companies are using paid versus organic nowadays?
This was basically for getting out news and information and for advertising. And so what we're seeing is that rather than making all of these announcements on their Facebook or Twitter pages, that they were very often going to paid, whether it be Google or Facebook. And so there's a lot more. If we look at ad revenue, it's gone way up in the past couple of years. So we can see the metrics from both sides right now.
What about from your perspective, Rachel? What do you sort of see the benefits or the usefulness of paid versus social?
I think the benefits of
paid versus organic.
Yes. If you think of organic content, you're generally reaching a broader, and more diverse audience and individuals who already follow your accounts typically. Paid social media does allow companies to reach an audience that they may not be able to reach through organic content. Paid also allows you to do some testing that you may not be able to do in organic content. Testing, how your content performs against different audience types, or groups that you may have never developed content for. So I think in that along that vein, or with that thinking, paid can be an effective method for corporate social media use combined with organic.
Right. So it's that combination that's important of using both. Would you agree?
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Nora, you focused a little bit on blogs there for a while, and there were some interesting findings there. A couple of points to note here. First of all, with regard to the comments and the decrease in comments, I mean, I can't help but feel that that's purely because the other social media platforms are now used as a place for engagement and for people to comment. Is that a reasonable assumption?
I think it is. I think that a lot of the platforms are now sharing very similar attributes. And I think this is one of the things that's happened is you can do a lot of these things in a lot of places. And so that's certainly a component. There's no question about that. I think what bothers me more is the original conception of a blog. And when we look at the history, like Naked Conversations and Shell Israel's perspective, I think that blogs originally came into being as ways to humanize corporations and a way to speak in an authentic voice. And those are the things that I think we're now transitioning out of. And maybe it's picked up in some other ways on some other platforms. I mean, certainly Instagram does a really good job of conveying some things that maybe blogs don't do anymore. But it's certainly a feature of blogs that has diminished.
Interesting, and good timing here in the comments section. We have a note here to your question about why the decline of comments in blogs. The common reasons that Rosa has seen here, this is Rosa Alonso, too much spam, and it's easy to spam blogs. Number two, they're too time consuming to ensure quality comments and to moderate. It's resource intensive. And then number three, which is what we were just talking about, discussions have moved to broader social platforms, which importantly also work to drive traffic to the website. And Rosa makes a great last point here. I would love to see actual data behind this in your next study. Nora and I were talking about this earlier before we got started, but Nora, I think you're very open to hearing suggestions from the audience here about how to evolve the study. Am I right?
That is wonderful. First of all, thanks, Rosa. I mean, those are great points. And I would definitely include in the next study some questions about why we're seeing what we're seeing. And thank you for contributing that. I'm open to any suggestions to making this study useful for corporations, businesses, anybody who's looking to this research. I need to know what you need to know so that I can provide it. I mean, research isn't any good if somebody can't use it. So you can certainly advise me anytime. Thanks.
So there you go, a call to arms from the researcher there. Thank you, Nora. Thank you, Rosa. One last question I want to ask you, Nora, about blogs. You said that they've sort of turned into more product promotional tools. In my opinion, it seems strange that that's what they're being used for. Do you think do you see that sort of as an effective method to promote products through blogs, or do you think they're just sort of, I don't know, grappling, holding on to a way to keep blogs alive?
The blogs that we read and that we classified as using promotion do it in somewhat of a bloggish way. So, for example, if you looked at a major pet food company, they talked about a particular problem and how it could be solved using some of their products. So, it was promotional and conversational at the same time, but any blog that promoted their product and only their product and had a link to their brand page, and we classified as promotional. So it's that kind of a strange mix right now, whereas the original blog was really separate from all of that. It was really conversation about the company's industry, maybe, or the company's mission or purpose. And we're seeing a movement away from that.
Interesting. Okay, just a note to everyone out there. I'm not going to stop for a formal break to when we go to audience Q&A. As you've seen, I'll just field the comments and questions as they come in. So please feel free to continue adding your comments and perspectives, particularly if you represent one of these Fortune 500 companies. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Let's move along to social media plans. Again, Nora, you said you've been surprised at how few companies actually have a social media plan in place. Rachel, I'd like to pose this to you first. How important is a social media plan, do you find?
I find it to be pretty important. In a field as dynamic as social media, you need to have a plan in place. For you're first putting on, your communicator and your creative director hat, or your copywriter and your creative director hat, creating, a piece of content. And there's an incredible amount of work that goes into creating that single piece of content that maybe somebody will only spend a few seconds looking at or engaging with. And then after the fact, you have to put on your sort of a data analyst hat and parse through all of the data that's available from each platform to determine actionable insights. Make decisions based off of course corrections, we'll say, based off of those insights. So to have a plan in place to continue to guide you along the way has been very important.
Okay, and what about crisis plans? Where do they fit into the sort of whole idea of social media plans generally?
The social team here at TI does work very closely with the crisis management team, which is part of our overall communication strategy. I think in this new digital communications age, the communications world itself is flat. What you may read in a newspaper or watch on the evening news can, naturally and generally does translate into social media, and vice versa. Something that may start in social media can transfer over into what you may read in a newspaper or watch on the evening news. For that reason, it's important that companies are prepared.
Yep, great. Nora, any reflections from you on the social media plans? I know it was something that you had observed. Do you have any opinions about them, about what a good social media plan might look like and how companies should be using them effectively?
Yeah, I do. First of all, there are many, many great examples online of social media plans that businesses have shared, universities have shared. So you can easily look at some really terrific social media plans. But I have to tell you, higher ed is the biggest problem of all, because colleges and universities use students to handle their social media accounts. And so very often we have a student who is responsible for a Facebook account or a Twitter account, because we all make the assumption at a university that they're very good at these things. They don't speak in corporate voices or no business strategy, and very often are prone to put the university at risk. So I see close up what this can bring. We did have a student at a university who was sued because the student put on the university's page, "We guarantee everybody gets a job who graduates from here." And of course that didn't happen. And I've seen it in my world. There needs to be some care in terms of a plan and who manages these accounts and what you do in case of someone saying something that shouldn't be said, some kind of check and balance system. So I can tell you that I think it needs to be done. I think that there have been cases where there have been problems because the entity does not have a plan in place.
Yeah, thanks for that, Nora. Now, just expanding on this topic a little bit, Rachel, you talked about collecting data to determine actionable insights, which points a little bit, I think, towards measurement, the importance of measuring social media. I'd like to hear a little bit about how you do it at Texas Instruments, but also note that I still so often see that companies really just refer to the vanity metrics when they're measuring social media. I'd love to hear from you what something a little more advanced looks like, because I can't help but feel that with this saturation that we're seeing here, measurement must be playing a part in that. So what does good measurement of social media look like?
Sure. And you raised a point about vanity metrics, and so I'm going to answer this without mentioning any particular metrics by name, because I think the basic tenets of what good measurement looks like will guide you to metrics that provide those insights. But I think it kind of goes back to the point I made earlier about social media, and that measuring, you want to create content, that fits your audience, that fits the channel, and that, adds to the conversation and furthers your brand. And so whatever metrics you do use to measure, those metrics should help answer those questions. Did you deliver the right message to the right audience on the right channel? And if it is a paid post, did you spend the appropriate amount of money? And so whatever metrics you do look at should help you assess that. And I think, just as a whole too, it's understanding how effectively you are communicating to your audience. And so those vanity metrics may not answer those for you, or that for you.
Yeah, fair enough. Nora, you pointed out a few companies that you particularly like, or that are notable in terms of social media use. Do you have any examples of companies that measure social media really effectively? I think your slide before referred a lot to activity and likes and followers, if I'm not mistaken, but any that stand out as great measurement examples?
What's interesting is that one of the questions we did ask in the Inc. 500 is, do you measure the effectiveness of your social media beyond the vanity measures? And almost always they say no. So besides the analytics that come in a package with paid, that I think Rachel was referring to, there's not a lot of measuring going on, and that's a problem. The problem is that for a long time we relied on likes and tweets and retweets as measurement. And it didn't take too long to find out that you certainly could alter those things or monitor those things in different ways. We have not moved on to effective metrics. I think there may be some companies working on that. Maybe Rachel knows some. In my research, most of the time we're being told that they're struggling in that area. Effective metrics for social media, I think, is still an area that we really need to work on.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. If anyone out there in the audience has a response that they'd like to put in the chat pod there, please feel free to do so. We're coming to the last portion of the webcast, so we've only got a few minutes left. Again, I'll give the audience one last chance to ask any final questions or make any final points. But while you're thinking of that and while you're doing that, Nora, we spoke a little bit about these newer platforms, the uptake of those by the Inc. 500 versus the much slower uptake by the Fortune 500. Could you just reflect a little bit on what you found? I'm really surprised that platforms like TikTok and Snapchat are not really being embraced by these large companies. The Inc. 500 is more inclined to do so. Why do you think these smaller companies are a little bit more into the newer platforms than the large ones?
Someone told me once that you think of the Fortune 500 as a gigantic boat in the middle of the ocean and how long it would take for them to turn around. And the Inc. 500 might be like a little boat. So they can make changes more quickly. In many cases, the Inc. 500, and they're described as fastest growing companies. So they're obviously making decisions quickly. They're moving quickly. And also the social media is more integrated because there are fewer people and people wearing more hats. And so it is not unusual in many of these cases for what we would call the C-suite people to also be the social media people or to be involved in marketing. So I think that they're just more nimble and more able to grab and to use some of these platforms. I think everything is more cumbersome in the Fortune 500. You're talking about companies with thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, just huge companies where departments are the size of individual companies themselves, just huge corporations. And so to get these things approved, to have discussion of them, to talk about them, to approve them, to use them, to monitor them is really a much bigger deal. And I think that what we've seen is they kind of go with what they know, that there's not a lot of change. I think what we can see from the statistics is they just continue to use more of what they've used in the past. And the Fortune 500 seems to be a safer group. They go with the status quo, and the Inc. 500 seems to be more risk takers. So I would love to try some new platforms. I don't know, maybe we'll put Snapchat back up. Maybe we can put some of those back up. I think Google Plus is gone, so that's not going to work. Pinterest never seemed to really resonate, except with those companies that had large female audiences, in a particular industry. So we could try to reissue those. I'm more interested in whether or not we should look at TikTok or something like that, if there's any value in looking at something like that among both the Inc. and the Fortune. And I'd love to hear what people think about that.
Yeah, there you go. Another call to arms. And it looks like Rosa has responded. As a B2B social marketer, would you say that paid placement is more or less important than it would be in a B2C environment? I think that goes to you, Rachel.
Is paid social media more or less important for a B2B company than a B2C company? Is that the question?
Is more or less, yes, that's correct.
Speaking only from a B2B perspective, I think only from a B2B perspective, but I think the tenets apply across the board. It's going back to where's your audience. If your audience is following you already on these channels, you've probably got them. So great. If you are trying to get to more of your existing audience or a new audience, that's where the opportunities for paid come in.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. I threw you a curveball there. That question came in just as I was about to ask you about the newer platforms as well, and to get your perspective from a Fortune 500 company. How do you go about keeping an eye out on what's coming up and whether or not it's a platform that you need to be on? Where does that factor into your social media plan?
Considering new channels is something that we do look at, but it all comes back to that overarching rule and goal that we have to create content that fits our audiences where our audiences are at. So right now we're on platforms where our audiences are, but it is something that's always discussed.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. It's where your audiences are, right? So these platforms perhaps need to do a bit of work to increase their audience sizes to get the attention of the Fortune 500. So I am going to end it there because we're almost out of time. I want to thank Rachel and Nora very, very much for joining me. As Nora has pointed out a couple of times, they're very open to hearing more thoughts and suggestions on how to expand the study. So I encourage you to visit the Center for Marketing Research website at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. Nora, anywhere else I should be pointing them to engage with you?
You can use my Twitter handle. It's just Nora Barnes, NoraBarnes, and that's fine too.
Well, that makes a lot of sense that we're referencing social media on a social media webcast. So again, thank you very much. Thank you to everyone out there for joining us. We have our next Marketing Communications Center Chat webcast on January 30th next year. Wow, next decade. How about that? Unicorns do it differently. How startup branding models are changing the game. And my colleague JP Coolvine will be joined by JB Osborne, who is the CEO and co-founder of Red Antler. So please join us for that. Again, I thank you to Nora and Rachel. Thank you to everyone for joining. The research, as Nora said, will be available through the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth Center for Marketing Research website. Just to note that the Inc. 500 study is a separate study to the Fortune 500 study. So the Fortune 500 study should be available for 2019, and then we'll see the Inc. 500 in the new year. Other than that, that's it from me. That's it from the conference board. Happy holidays to you all. Please spare a thought for me on Sunday as I spend 30 hours making my way to Perth, Western Australia. But once I get there, it will be lovely. Happy holidays, everyone, and thanks again for joining. This has been a conference board webcast.
Thank you.